So I suppose we could talk a little bit about the production of the music itself.
Yeah, go on.
So we didn't. I mean, the music was the first idea when we started talking about this paper ages ago.
Yeah.
In March 2007.
That was the start point for it. Really, it was something that had been kicking around my head for a while.
And we had this, we had this little laugh and said, "Haha, wouldn't it be funny if we just ran this data through a drum machine?" And then both of us kind of went, "Oh, hang on,
let's try that." Yeah, let's do that.
Now, the thing about that to say is that it's all very well if you happen to be a musician with a very powerful Apple Mac and you've got Pro Tools or Cakewalk to play with.
Yeah.
But we didn't have any of those things. So once again, my poor little office computer had to take the strain of this. This is a Dell box from a few years ago now, and it's really starting to creak. And so we wandered around the web, and so I found a website that the music department of East Washington University had put up, which basically will take numerical data and convert it to a MIDI file, which is great. So you can make a MIDI file, and that will play on some computers as kind of basic piano noises. But if you want to do something more clever than that, then you have to basically take that MIDI file, which is kind of a musical interchange file, and run it through some other software. So trying to, if we had Pro Tools or Cakewalk, that would be dead easy, but didn't have those. So found a piece of freeware on the web called Reaper, and Reaper is a lovely piece of software, and it's free, and it's kind of like Pro Tools for cheap people. And then got a sort of plug-in module called SFX, which plays MIDI files, and then some cheap sort of MIDI converters on the web, which are all kind of cheap and free, which meant that you tend to get things like cheap 80s synthesizer sounds rather than anything kind of cool, clean and modern that your average band would be using today.
Well, the 80s are back in fashion.
So, and we weren't born in the 80s, so we're okay.
Yeah.
So basically wrapping all that sort of cheap ass technology together gets us around the fact that we didn't have any money to actually
do this. Yeah.
And then with those kind of free MIDI modules with synthesizer sounds and drum sounds and various other noises, we kind of wrap things together from different bits of data.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes through all right. The music is jarring, but it does get that kind of feel of how I guess socio-natural rhythms are when you sound them, when you actually play them. Yeah, I mean,
these rhythms aren't musical, and so I mean this one in particular, which we're looking at now, we kind of, when we finished it, and we have these kind of the two sounds within it, the synthesizer line and the drum line, it did sound a bit kind of techno-ish.
Yeah.
Because it's quite intense.
Well, when we presented this at the IBG, we actually had some glow sticks and were dancing to this, which was interesting at 1:30 in the morning on a Wednesday morning in North London.
In a respectable part of North London at that.
Yeah, I don't think it'll ever happen again.
But I mean, we did have that thing of, even if people didn't particularly enjoy the paper, by God, they were going to remember it. That was definitely part of our agenda.
Yeah, very much.
We should cover some of the more theoretical things that Gail Davis raised. Gail said in the refereeing process, because we couldn't be sort of a novice to be refereed, because obviously our images were up there, that Gail suggested that she shouldn't be anonymous as a referee to kind of break that tension. So
yeah, which was really nice actually. But I found both sets of comments from the referees really helpful. Some of the most helpful, constructive, interesting comments I've ever received. So,
other referees out there, bear that in mind, you gits.
Yeah.
Now, we should probably say something about this idea of the way that Lefebvre locates rhythm in particular places at particular times.
Yeah, undoubtedly attention here. In the first part of the paper, we very much do this, and we focus on socio-natural rhythms from Birmingham, basically, and its environs, whether climatic or hydrological and so on. The first part of the paper is very much about that rhythm in place. But then we start to transpose these insights to more abstract register. We start using them to make general arguments about environmental science, about synesthesia, and so on. I think this tension probably is implicit in the paper. We do not address this tension. But if we were to address the tension, I guess you're looking at that wider problem about the relationship between the particular and the general. And I think the way we talk about it maps onto kind of representational transposition. So we go from place and the noise that place makes to scientific representation. In our case, fed through a MIDI machine, so it's represented as a rhythm. But we go from the actual place to the representation of that. So we go from the rhythm to some kind of aural representation. So I think the abstraction from the specific of the first half of the paper to the general of the second half is bound up with this process of representation. And I think it's fair enough to pigeonhole this paper as mostly playing with that idea of representation, both through putting scientific data into an aural format, presenting an academic paper in a video format, and so on. So yes, it's playing around representation. But further, I think there are parallels in Lefebvre's own work when we think about the production of space and how he breaks down a typology of space, in that he distinguishes between spaces of representation, what he calls lived space, and representations of space, conceived space. So I guess in Lefebvre also there is kind of a transition from the specific to the general. There's some other questions we could get into. I mean, for Lefebvre, social space is inherently productive and performative. So I guess we could think about what productivity and performativity mean if we're talking about socio-natural space. We could then start to ask, well, what role does science play in the relationship between socio-natural space, the representation of space, and then how that keys into modes of production. So there's a whole series of questions we could ask there, but certainly in terms of that transition from specific to general, I think that can be laid within Lefebvre's conception of space.
And this little interlude kind of illustrates the point that Gail makes right at the start of the paper. If you're talking about these issues, you're going to talk in quite a dense and in time, a little bit impenetrable kind of way.
Yeah, very much so.
So, it's kind of difficult to put these things across in a kind of documentary form.
Yeah.
I mean, the other point that Gail raised was that kind of whether capitalism always replaces cyclical rhythms with sort of linear ones.
I mean, this is a good point. Because we can think of highly cyclical rhythms that are a product of capitalism. Something like rush hour, for example. That's very much a product of capitalism. It's highly cyclical, it's highly pronounced. Going back to Lefebvre, and this is something we do mention in the paper, he argues that cyclical and linear rhythms bleed together in reality. They're entangled. They can only be disentangled in analysis. I mean, this is potentially something of a cop-out, because if they're entangled in reality but we disentangle them in analysis, then we still need to understand the relation between them, whether they're real or whether it's just the kind of analytical framework we put on it. We've been thinking about this a bit. I mean, something Phil suggested was maybe cyclical rhythms don't grate on us as much because we're evolved to circadian patterns of life anyway. So maybe as humans we notice the imposition of linear time more acutely. I was also thinking maybe we should consider the rhythm of the event as much as the rhythm of the physical system.
We've run out of time really to consider this further, but we'll probably write some more about it. So this is Phil and James signing off. Hope you enjoyed the paper.
Yeah, cheerio.